Right, so get this. We're going deep today.
Yeah.
A real head-scratcher of a case, decades old. The disappearance of Gay Gibson from, an ocean liner, a Durban castle,
Mhm.
back in, 1947.
Wow.
Yeah,
Wow.
1947. And, you share this amazing case file episode with me, Case 184, the Gay Gibson one, just tons of info.
Yeah.
So we're going to, sift through it all this evidence, all these, conflicting stories, see if we can figure out, what happened to her.
It really is fascinating. I mean, especially with like the whole post-World War II thing going on,
Yeah.
kind of this, atmosphere of hope and new beginnings. But then you have this like dark mystery unfolding on this ship sailing from South Africa to England.
It's like straight out of one of those Agatha Christie novels, isn't it?
Right.
So let's set the stage. Our, our main character here, Gay Gibson, 21 years old, aspiring actress, traveling alone, right, to, to chase her dreams on the London stage. I mean, can you imagine the excitement, the anticipation, the nerves even, setting off on this big adventure, especially back then?
Oh, absolutely. And, it's important to remember that solo female travel, I mean, it just wasn't that common in 1947.
Right.
So it definitely adds another layer to her story,
Yeah.
a layer of vulnerability. And it probably, influenced how people saw her and how the events that happened, unfolded.
And the Durban Castle itself, I mean, the ship, it's almost like its own character in the story, a huge, luxurious liner.
Yeah.
But on this particular trip, the return journey, it wasn't even full.
Mm.
Gay even described it in a letter home as a, quote, ghost ship.
Wow.
So do you think that, that emptiness, played a role? Did it create a false sense of security or maybe even make her more vulnerable in a way?
That's a really good question. It's certainly possible, I think, that that the reduced number of passengers and crew,
Yeah.
that it could have contributed to a different feeling on board.
Right.
And, maybe that impacted how people interacted, how events were perceived even.
Totally. And, Gay herself, well, from what we've read, she seemed outwardly cheerful, friendly, made friends easily
Yeah.
with fellow passengers, crew. But there are these hints, right,
Yeah.
of something more, under the surface, sadness, fatigue, maybe even some health issues.
Yeah, that raises a big question, doesn't it? Did Gay's personality and her behavior, did that play a role in her disappearance? Was she as carefree as she seemed? Or were there underlying factors that might have contributed to what happened?
Okay, so let's jump ahead to that Saturday morning, the fateful one, around 7:30 a.m. The stewardess, she goes to wake Gay up. But the cabin, it's empty. Porthole, wide open. Orange juice untouched. And
Yo.
get this, the sheets, they're stained. And the stewardess, she specifically said this wasn't like Gay at all. What do you make of that detail?
Well, that's where it gets interesting. The porthole, I mean, obviously that suggests, right, the possibility of a fall overboard. But those stained sheets, that doesn't really fit, does it? It suggests something else happened in that cabin.
Yeah.
Beyond, just someone sleeping there. It brings up a whole new set of questions.
Totally. It's like a clue that just doesn't quite, fit the obvious theory.
Mm.
And as the crew starts searching, the concern, it grows. They turn the ship around, scour the water. But no Gay. And the captain, at this point, he starts to suspect, foul play.
Yeah, and if you think about the context, right, 1947, women's safety wasn't exactly openly discussed back then. So it's possible that, that initial thought, the accident theory, that it might have, delayed a more thorough investigation into other possibilities.
Right. Now, there were these two men on board, Frank Hopwood and William Bray. They'd become pretty friendly with Gay during the trip, both older, traveling alone, and they kind of felt, I guess, protective of her.
Yeah.
And they were among the last to see her before she vanished.
Interesting. Their concern, it said something, right, about the social dynamics. I mean, these men, they probably felt responsible in a way for Gay's well-being, given her age, the fact that she was alone. It speaks to the societal expectations of that time.
Yeah, for sure. And then we have James Cam, a deck steward. He had this reputation. Charming, but let's just say, he had a roving eye.
Right.
And he seemed to take a particular interest in Gay. There were reports of him lurking around her cabin. Even though deck stewards, they were totally forbidden from entering passenger cabins.
Yeah, and this is where I think the alarm bells start going off. Cam's behavior, it just crosses boundaries. He's gossiping about Gay, even suggesting she might be pregnant, which really paints a picture of, an unhealthy fixation.
And I think the most chilling piece of evidence comes from the night watchman, wouldn't you say?
Oh, definitely.
He's drawn to Gay's cabin because of something strange. Both the steward and stewardess call buttons, they're ringing at the same time. He sees Cam inside the cabin, hears a man's voice, and then Cam slams the door in his face.
I mean, that's a pivotal moment, right? You have an eyewitness placing Cam in Gay's cabin in the middle of the night. And his reaction, it's just undeniably suspicious. You have to wonder, what was he doing there? Why were both call buttons pressed? And why try so hard to hide? And, like, you have to wonder, right, what's going through Cam's head at that point? He's caught, basically. And now the investigation, it really kicks into gear.
Yeah, big time. Scotland Yard detectives are brought in and the pressure's on. Hours of interrogation. Finally, Cam cracks. He confesses. But his story, it's pretty wild. He says they had sex, consensual. And then she suddenly dies. He panics, throws her body out the porthole. I mean, what do you think? Genuine remorse? Or a calculated move to, cover his tracks?
Well, I mean, even his confession, it's full of inconsistencies. The detectives, they didn't buy it for a second. They were convinced, right, that he strangled Gay and made up this whole story. And the fact that his story keeps changing, that definitely doesn't help him.
No, definitely not. At first he denied even being in the cabin at all. Then he admitted to bringing her a drink, but earlier in the trip. It's also shady. And then there's that second confession. Even more detailed, given to a detective who, had a bit of a, shall we say, a reputation. This time Cam says, yeah, he strangled her. Even describes the sound she made hitting the water. I mean, doesn't that point to guilt? Confessing twice? Even if, the methods were maybe questionable?
It's not that simple, unfortunately. That second confession, it's really unreliable. This detective, he was known for, using pressure, coercion, to get confessions. So it raises serious doubts, right, about whether Pam's words are actually the truth. Or just, like, a desperate attempt to please his interrogator. Who knows?
So we've got these confessions, but also a ton of unanswered questions. And this is where Cam's defense attorney comes in, right? Joshua Caswell. He's convinced there's more to the story. That maybe, just maybe, Cam isn't a murderer. So he starts digging into Gay's past, trying to find another explanation.
And his investigation, it uncovers some pretty compelling stuff. Caswell travels to South Africa, interviews people who knew Gay, and a different picture emerges. There's talk of, like, a possible heart condition, fainting spells, even whispers of, a possible pregnancy.
So that raises the possibility, right? That Gay's death wasn't murder at all. How likely do you think that is, given all the other evidence?
Well, it's the theory that the defense goes with. And they do have some evidence, right? The witness testimonies about Gay's health, the fact that Cam didn't have any defensive wounds, and, of course, that questionable second confession. All of that casts doubt on the prosecution's case.
Okay, so now we've got the porthole murder trial. It's all over the news, a total sensation. The public is, like, completely captivated.
Oh, yeah. Classic true crime. Right. A glamorous young actress, this mysterious disappearance at sea, a handsome deck steward who might be, a villain. It's got all the ingredients for a gripping story.
Totally. And the defense, they really try to paint this picture of Gay as, like, promiscuous, suggesting her death was just this, tragic accident during sex. They argue, like, Cam wouldn't have the kind of injuries you'd expect, right, from a fight, a struggle, if he'd really murdered her.
But the prosecution, they're pushing back. They're saying, no, Cam's a predator. He killed Gay after she rejected him. They point to, for example, the contraceptive devices they found in her luggage, saying she wouldn't have needed them if it was, consensual. They also bring up, like, a crash that a neighbor heard and the fact that Gay's pajamas are missing.
Suggesting a struggle, right? That Cam tried to, like, hide evidence. It's crazy. Two completely different explanations, both kind of believable in a way. So what did the jury make of it all?
Well, despite all the defense's efforts, they deliver a guilty verdict. Cam's sentenced to death, but, capital punishment was abolished in the UK, so eventually it gets commuted to life in prison.
But even with a verdict, the speculation doesn't stop, does it? This rumor pops up about a dentist who claims to have Gay's missing pajamas, implying that she was with someone else that night.
Yeah, that rumor, it's like a lot of others in this case. A dead end. It's almost like the mystery takes on a life of its own, fueled by the public's fascination, their desire for a concrete answer.
Totally. And to make things even more complicated, right?
Yeah.
After Cam's convicted, it comes out that, get this, he had assaulted other women on board the Durban Castle, incidents that weren't even mentioned during the trial.
That's a huge revelation. It definitely paints Cam in a much darker light, makes it more likely that he was, a predator. But it also muddies the waters, doesn't it? Would knowing about those assaults have changed the trial? Or would it have made it even harder to figure out exactly what happened to Gay?
So, Cam goes to prison. serves 11 years, and then he's released. But his story doesn't end there.
Yeah, this is where it gets really interesting. Cam, he basically cashes in on his notoriety. He sells his story to the newspapers, adds new details, which are, questionable at best. But then he does it again, assaults a 13-year-old girl, and later he breaks into a room full of young girls. So back to prison he goes, and eventually that's where he dies.
This case, it keeps twisting and turning, doesn't it? Even after all this time, we're left with more questions than answers. Was
Yeah.
it a tragic accident? Was it murder? Did she die from natural causes? What do you think?
I mean, that's the question that's been plaguing everyone, investigators, authors, even armchair detectives for years. But then, just when you think there are no more leads, something new comes up. This author, Anthony Brown, in his recent investigation, he proposes an interesting theory. He thinks that maybe Cam accidentally killed Gay during an assault, and that maybe her heart condition was a factor.
Right, right. He got access to all police files.
Yeah.
And his idea is that, her heart condition could have played a part. It's actually a pretty compelling theory because it tries to, connect some of the dots,
Yeah.
the conflicting evidence.
Exactly. It acknowledges Cam's history of violence, right?
Yeah.
But it also takes into account what those witnesses said about Gay's health. It's a sort of like middle ground between cold-blooded murder and an accidental death during sex.
And there's even a chance, even if it's a small one, that we might get a real answer someday.
Yeah.
They still have some of Gay's hair. They could do DNA testing. Do you think that could, finally solve the mystery?
It's a fascinating thought, isn't it? But I think it all comes down to, how advanced DNA technology gets. We might have to wait a bit longer for science to, catch up with this whole Gay Gibson mystery.
Really makes you think, all that evidence, investigations, even a trial that we still don't really know. It's like we're missing that one, key piece,
Yeah.
to make sense of it all.
Yeah, and it's especially sad, I think, because Gay's story gets lost, her dreams, all that, overshadowed by what Cam did. She almost becomes like a side note in this whole, narrative of violence and lies.
It makes you wonder, what if things had been different? What if she had survived that night? Would she have made it as
Yeah.
an actress? Her name in lights on the West End? Or would Cam have, kept going, hurting more women?
It's a question that, it sticks with you. We're left with these what ifs,
Mhm.
thinking about all the paths her life could have taken. It reminds you that justice, even when it happens, it doesn't always heal everything or answer all the questions.
It also reminds you that these cases, they're not just about, solving a crime. They're about understanding people,
Yeah.
right? How they behave, the norms of the time, how all of that plays a part.
Exactly. And that's why I think these deep dives, they're so important. We explore these cases, look at the evidence, consider all the angles, and we keep the victims' memories alive. We learn from the past and hopefully work towards a future where, these kinds of tragedies, they happen less.
Absolutely. So for everyone listening, we really encourage you, go check out this case. We'll link to Anthony Brown's book and that case file episode in the show notes. There's just so much more to discover.
Yeah, and as you're exploring it all, think about what parts of the story really speak to you. What does it tell us about truth, about the power of stories, and, just how complex we are as humans?
Yeah, great point. And remember, the conversation, it doesn't end here. Keep those minds curious, keep asking questions, and we'll see you next time for another Deep Dive.